December 7th, 1941. Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. The steering wheel trembled under Dr. Lytle S. Adams's hands as he sat in his parked car, having just witnessed millions of bats erupting from the cave mouth in their nightly exodus. The 60-year-old dentist from Irwin, Pennsylvania, had driven over 1,000 miles for this vacation, drawn by stories of the cavern's wonders. Now, as he turned on his car radio for the drive home, static gave way to frantic bulletins. Pearl Harbor was under attack. The Japanese Empire had struck without warning, crippling America's Pacific Fleet in a single morning. Adams stared at the swirling cloud of creatures still pouring from the cave, their ultrasonic cries beyond human hearing, their bodies perfectly evolved for night warfare. In that moment of national catastrophe, watching nature's most gentle nocturnal mammals navigate in perfect darkness, the small-town dentist conceived what would become the most bizarre weapons development program in American military history. Within 6 weeks, his wild idea would reach President Franklin D. Roosevelt's desk, carried there by connections Adams had cultivated through years of inventive proposals. Within 18 months, it would consume $2 million, employ some of America's most brilliant scientific minds, and nearly change the nature of warfare itself. The plan was so audacious that when Roosevelt first read the proposal, he wrote in a memorandum to Colonel William J. Donovan, head of what would become the Office of Strategic Services. "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." The man Roosevelt referred to had just proposed turning millions of bats into precision weapons of war. The mathematics of destruction were being calculated not in explosive yields or blast radiuses, but in the weight a half-ounce mammal could carry, the temperature at which these creatures entered hibernation, and the flight patterns of animals that had evolved for 60 million years without ever imagining they would become instruments in humanity's deadliest conflict. January 12, 1942. The White House, Washington, D.C. The letter that would launch the project arrived through channels that reflected Adams's unusual access to power. Years earlier, he had demonstrated an aerial mail pickup system to Eleanor Roosevelt, a device that allowed planes to collect mail bags from the ground without landing. The system used a hook and cable mechanism that snagged mail containers as the aircraft flew overhead at low altitude. The First Lady had been impressed by Adams's ingenuity, though the system never achieved widespread adoption. This connection ensured his new proposal wouldn't disappear into bureaucratic oblivion. "Dear Mr. President," Adams wrote in careful script, "I attach hereto a proposal designed to frighten, demoralize, and excite the prejudices of the people of the Japanese Empire." The language was deliberately provocative, designed to capture attention in a government suddenly overwhelmed with revenge fantasies and crackpot schemes. But Adams's proposal contained something the others lacked, a disturbing plausibility rooted in biological fact. The plan exploited 4 biological characteristics that Adams had researched exhaustively in the 5 weeks since Pearl Harbor. First, bats occurred in vast numbers. Single caves housed populations in the millions. Second, they could carry more than their own weight in flight, with females routinely transporting twins while hunting. Third, they hibernated predictably at specific temperatures, becoming dormant and manageable. Fourth, they instinctively sought dark, secluded roosts at dawn, penetrating structures through the smallest openings. Adams proposed capturing 1 million bats from the caves of Texas and New Mexico. Each would be fitted with a tiny incendiary device weighing less than an ounce. Cooled to hibernation temperature, they would be packed into special bomb casings, 1,000 per bomb. Dropped over Japanese cities before dawn, the casings would open at predetermined altitudes, releasing the now warming creatures to seek shelter in the eaves, attics, and walls of buildings constructed primarily of wood, paper, and bamboo. Timer-delayed incendiaries would ignite simultaneously across a 40-mile radius, creating uncountable fires in locations impossible to reach quickly. The proposal's genius lay not in its destructive power, but in its exploitation of Japanese architecture and psychology. Japanese cities were tinderboxes of wooden structures packed closely together. Fire was the ancient enemy that had destroyed Edo repeatedly, that required constant vigilance and community cooperation to combat. An attack that started fires everywhere simultaneously would create not just physical destruction, but psychological collapse. The randomness would be more terrifying than precision bombing. No shelter would be safe from creatures that could enter through a crack no wider than a pencil. Roosevelt forwarded the proposal to Colonel Donovan with his cryptic endorsement. Donovan, a veteran of World War I and Wall Street lawyer, had seen enough of war to know that unconventional weapons often proved decisive. He passed it to the National Defense Research Committee, the same organization overseeing research into radar, proximity fuses, and a theoretical weapon based on uranium fission. The NDRC's review board included Dr. Donald Griffin, whose groundbreaking research had discovered echolocation in bats just 2 years earlier at Harvard. Griffin understood their capabilities better than any scientist in America. His endorsement carried decisive weight. This proposal seems bizarre and visionary at first glance, but extensive experience with experimental biology convinces the writer that if executed competently, it would have every chance of success. By March 1942, Adams received official approval from General William Porter, Chief of the Army Chemical Warfare Service. The project was classified top secret, funded initially at $100,000, with promise of unlimited resources if early tests proved successful. No official codename was assigned initially. It was simply referred to as the Adams Plan in classified documents. Adams was given extraordinary authority to recruit personnel and requisition materials. The team Adams assembled defied military convention. Dr. Jack von Blocher, Jr., a mammologist from the Los Angeles County Museum, brought essential scientific credibility. When approached by Adams in March 1942, von Blocher was initially skeptical about weaponizing animals, but agreed to lead the biological research. Jack Kufer had just turned 17 on December 7, 1941. He had been on Santa Rosa Island with a museum expedition when Pearl Harbor was attacked, remaining marooned for 2 weeks when all West Coast ports were sealed. As von Blocher's student assistant, he had handled thousands of bat specimens. In June 1943, freshly drafted into the Army, he was assigned to the project. Decades later, his memoir would provide the only first-hand account of the project's human dimension. Harry Fletcher, Kufer's fellow assistant, was 2 years older and had been studying mammalian hibernation at the museum. Lieutenant Tim Holt brought Hollywood glamour. Already famous from starring in Stagecoach, the 24-year-old actor had enlisted immediately after Pearl Harbor. Eddie Herold, a professional strongman who could tear telephone books in half, handled heavy equipment. His brother Bobby managed logistics. Patricio Patsy Batista claimed to have driven for Al Capone's organization in Chicago. Whether true or embellished, his connections in the Southwest proved invaluable for acquiring scarce materials outside official channels. Ray Williams, a Maine lobster fisherman, designed capture nets and transport systems. The Benish brothers, Frank and Mark, were ranch hands from Bandera, Texas, who knew every cave within 500 miles. This unlikely team established headquarters in Bandera, Texas, in April 1942. The town sat in the hill country northwest of San Antonio, surrounded by limestone caves. The Ney Cave, 10 miles from town, contained an estimated 20 to 30 million individuals, the largest known colony in North America. The target species, Tadarida brasiliensis, seemed designed by evolution for Adams's purpose. Weighing between 11 and 14 grams, roughly half an ounce, these animals could carry up to 20 grams in flight. They flew at speeds up to 60 miles per hour with a range exceeding 50 miles per night. Most critically, they exhibited predictable hibernation behavior. When air temperature dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, they entered torpor, a state where heart rate dropped from 400 to 25 beats per minute. The first capture operations began on a moonless night in April 1942. Williams and the Benish brothers had constructed nets from silk parachute material, each covering 100 square feet. These were suspended across cave entrances at sunset. As darkness fell, the cave's residents began their emergence, a living river that had occurred every night for millennia. The nets filled instantly. By dawn, they had collected 5,000 specimens for initial testing. The captured animals were transported in a refrigerated truck Adams had purchased from a bankrupt ice cream company. Temperature was maintained at precisely 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to induce torpor but not cause tissue damage. The dormant creatures were packed in layers separated by burlap, up to 1,000 per crate. Back at the makeshift laboratory, a converted barn on the Benish ranch, von Blöcher began systematic studies of carrying capacity. Each specimen was weighed on a precision scale borrowed from a jewelry store. Test weights made from lead shot and wax were attached using various methods. The results were encouraging, but revealed unexpected challenges. They could indeed carry weights up to 18 grams, but flight became laboured. Only adhesive attachment to chest fur proved reliable. While von Blöcher wrestled with biological challenges, Adams faced bureaucratic ones. The Army Chemical Warfare Service viewed the project with skepticism. Colonel Harold Briggs, assigned as military liaison, wrote in a memo, "The entire enterprise seems more suitable for a circus than serious military application." The first military observers arrived in May 1942. Adams had prepared carefully, selecting optimal conditions. In the barn, 50 test subjects carrying dummy weights were released. They flew perfectly, seeking dark corners, crawling into spaces between boards. The observers were impressed despite themselves. Captain Wiley Carr, representing the Chemical Warfare Service, wrote, "The bats demonstrated remarkable ability to carry loads exceeding their body weight while maintaining directional control. Their instinct to seek dark, confined spaces upon approaching daylight appears absolute." The challenge of developing the incendiary device fell to Dr. Louis Fieser, the Harvard chemist who had invented napalm on Valentine's Day 1942. His first test on Harvard's soccer field on July 4, 1942, had created a spectacular fireball. Working at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, Fieser faced seemingly impossible requirements. The device had to weigh less than 18 grams complete, burn hot enough to ignite wood reliably, and include a timing mechanism. Fieser's solution was elegant. The H2 unit consisted of a celluloid capsule containing 17 grams of napalm. The ignition system used chemical delay, a glass vial containing copper chloride solution that would dissolve a steel wire. When the wire parted, a spring-loaded firing pin would strike a percussion cap, igniting the napalm. The entire mechanism weighed less than 2 grams. Manufacturing required techniques borrowed from watchmaking. Each firing pin was hand-filed to tolerance of 0.01 millimeter. Assembly required workers using jeweler's loupes in dust-free environments. By August 1942, Fieser had produced 100 units for testing. The test site was a mock village constructed in the desert 40 miles from Bandera. The Chemical Warfare Service had built 6 structures replicating Japanese architecture. On August 15, 1942, 100 armed subjects were released from a tower. Within 30 minutes, fires erupted across the village. By 35 minutes, all 6 buildings burned beyond suppression. Captain Carr's report captured the observers' reactions. The demonstration exceeded expectations dramatically. Fires started in locations that conventional incendiaries could never reach. In an actual city, conflagration would be inevitable. Fall 1942 brought expansion. The Army allocated $250,000 for development. A permanent facility was established at Muroc Army Airfield in California's Mojave Desert. An industrial refrigeration facility was constructed that could maintain 500,000 specimens in hibernation. The engineering was remarkable. Temperature controlled to within 1 degree, humidity at 85%, air circulation preventing carbon dioxide buildup. The delivery system underwent parallel development. The Mark 12 carrier was a sheet metal cylinder containing 26 circular trays, each holding 40 individuals in compartments. At 4,000 feet altitude, barometric pressure would trigger parachute deployment. At 1,000 feet, explosive bolts would split the casing. Each Mark 12 could carry 1,040 armed subjects. A single B-24 bomber could carry 24 units, deploying 24,960 over a target. Testing intensified through winter 1942 to 43. Each test revealed new problems. Cold weather affected flight. Wind scattered them unpredictably. General William Porter witnessed a demonstration in January 1943 where 500 armed subjects destroyed a mock village in 17 minutes. His report stated, "The weapon shows genuine promise. Random distribution and impossibility of defense could prove more damaging than conventional bombing." Spring 1943 brought crucial junctures. On May 2nd at Murok, 3,500 were released from a B-25 at 5,000 feet. The test failed. Most plummeted without flying. The problem was temperature management during aerial drop. Even with parachute deployment, insufficient time to warm existed. The second major test occurred May 15, 1943, at Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base. This would demonstrate the system for Army Air Force brass. Initial releases went perfectly. Then photographers requested live incendiaries for dramatic images. 6 armed specimens escaped handlers. What followed was catastrophic. The escaped subjects sought the darkest roosts, the airfield's wooden buildings. One entered the control tower through ventilation. Another crawled under a fuel tank. 2 found their way into hangars. Exactly 15 minutes later, incendiaries activated. The control tower erupted in flames. Buildings became infernos. The base fire crew was unprepared for napalm. Water spread the burning gel. By sunset, damage was complete. Control tower destroyed. Hangars gutted. Multiple buildings uninhabitable. A general's car blackened. Total damage exceeded $2 million. The entire auxiliary airfield, built months earlier, was effectively destroyed. The incident report stated simply, "Testing was concluded when fire destroyed a large portion of test material." Adams saw it differently. The accidental release conclusively proved effectiveness. 6 subjects destroyed an entire installation. Imagine what millions could do. This ignored the fundamental problem. The weapon was uncontrollable. The Army Air Forces transferred the project to the Navy in August 1943. The Navy assigned it codename Project X-Ray, with Marine Corps handling testing. Marines moved operations to El Centro Naval Air Facility, California. They approached with characteristic practicality. New facilities were constructed, refrigerated bunkers, laboratories, mock Japanese positions. Marine handlers developed protocols treating subjects like unstable explosives. September 1943 brought renewed testing. Results were mixed but encouraging. October 15th saw 1,000 destroy a mock position in 23 minutes, but failures remained common. October 22nd saw most fly to sea. December 1st succeeded brilliantly, only to have escapees start fires in nearby Holtville. The definitive test occurred December 15th, 1943, at Dugway Proving Ground, Utah. The Japanese village there replicated Tokyo districts with authentic materials. 5 B-24s released 30 canisters containing 31,200 armed subjects. Within minutes, they dispersed across the village. At 6:15, fires appeared. By 6:20, the village blazed. Observers counted 4,748 ignition points. Every structure burned simultaneously in unreachable locations. The incendiary testing chief wrote, "X-ray demonstrated unprecedented coverage." Standard bombing would produce 167 to 400 fires per load. X-ray produced 3,625 to 4,748 inches. Based on success, production planning began for 1 million operational units by summer 1944. This required industrial-scale collection, massive refrigeration, assembly lines. Plans envisioned first combat use October 1944 against Osaka. 10 B-29s would release 520,000 over the city before dawn. But problems mounted. Maintaining millions required enormous refrigeration. Disease spread despite veterinary efforts. Mortality reached 30% monthly. Incendiaries proved difficult to mass produce. Each required hand assembly. By February 1944, only 50,000 completed versus 500,000 planned. Competition for resources intensified. The Manhattan Project demanded unlimited priority. In late 1944, Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King received comprehensive briefings. The atomic bomb showed promise of ending war decisively. Dr. Vannevar Bush argued it represented fundamental breakthrough versus clever application. King cancelled Project X-Ray. His memorandum, program terminated due to scheduling conflicts with higher priority research. Adams was devastated. In an unsent letter to Roosevelt, he wrote, We created a weapon that would have ended war without mass casualties. The team dispersed. Kuffer served as combat cameraman. Holt returned to Hollywood. Von Blocher spent his career in conservation. Fieser's napalm became crucial. 40,000 tons dropped on Japan. The creatures were returned to caves, facilities repurposed or demolished. No physical evidence remained. August 6, 1945. News of Hiroshima reached Adams at his Pennsylvania practice. He excused himself from a patient. His nurse found him staring at project photographs. Adams maintained his weapon could have ended war more humanely. Think of thousands of fires breaking out simultaneously over 40 miles diameter. Japan could have been devastated, yet with small loss of life. Personnel remained sworn to secrecy until 1962 partial declassification. Kuffer's 1992 memoir revealed the human dimension. Japanese historians studied extensively. Professor Yukio Tanaka wrote, "The bat bomb represents American warfare at its most creative and terrifying." In 1985, surviving members reunited at Carlsbad Caverns. 12 of 40 attended. Eddie Herold said, "We tried turning nature into weapons. Thank God we failed." Adams died 1970, age 89, convinced his invention could have shortened war. The ecological impact would have been catastrophic. Removing millions would cause insect explosions. Each consumes its weight in insects nightly. Million consume 12 tons per night. Modern military planners occasionally revisit concepts. 2003 DARPA studied GPS-guided carriers before protests ended it. Declassified Dugway footage shows the village consumed by thousands of fires. Destruction as terrible poetry. The cave's residents continue ancient flights, unaware of narrow escape. Each sunset, millions emerge following patterns established over millennia. Project X-ray remains unique, a weapon progressing from conception through successful testing to production readiness, abandoned not for failure, but because something more terrible was available. It represents the road not taken in warfare's evolution. The story demonstrates that in total war, imagination becomes militarized, nature weaponized, moral boundaries dissolve pursuing victory. That it was abandoned for atomic weapons provides final irony. Today's debates about autonomous weapons and AI warfare gain perspective from this history. The creatures continue their eternal flight, navigating darkness with biological sonar, consuming insects, returning to roost before dawn. They remain what evolution made them: perfect nocturnal hunters, ecosystem components, unwitting survivors of humanity's attempt to weaponize nature itself.